how are things like coronavirus wise? Do you live? I don't want to get too personal. I cut this if you want, but do you live in like a densely populated urban area, or are you like a more suburban area?
See, that's the thing. Australia has these like what you would class as suburbs, but they're like like in the city essentially. Like they're suburbs, but just on the outside of the city. Like for me to drive to the middle of the city, it takes me about 15 to 30 minutes, depending on traffic. Like that type of thing.
So they're suburbs, but they're probably more densely packed than the ones that we probably think of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like there are those suburbs in it, like the American style ones, which are out of the way. Like they take an hour to drive to and from and stuff like that. But like the place where I live, it's like the more
it's close to the city.
Yes.
So how's like life there? Has it changed? Like are things open?
I live right next to a school. So in terms of people going to school, that hasn't actually changed. Like at least that I'm aware of, because I still see people getting picked up from school and stuff like that.
Have you guys? Do you know how many cases Australia's had? I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know either. I haven't been keeping track.
famous last words.
Yeah. Exactly. I do know that they shut down. So there's two arguably big universities in my city, and I go to one of them. They've shut down the other one. So, but like, I don't think there were, so
you anticipate classes probably being canceled for you pretty soon.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of where Jane is at her job. Like, like for now it's report as usual, but like she came home 4 hours early today, and tomorrow she's supposed to show up, but there's a good chance that they will either send her home with like a laptop or something will happen right there. She's not staying the whole day probably, but the plan officially is show up and do everything as normal, which is it's a little late for that kind of shit. Like it just America, I mean, in here in America, I don't know what it's like in Australia where you are.
Well, I was about to say comparatively, like, it is like actual. It's out of control for you guys. Like, it's impossible at this point to even think about trying to be like, oh, hey, let's test everyone and see who's got it and whatnot.
Yeah, that's why the testing was so important, and like I don't know why people don't seem to understand this, because it's not that complicated scientifically. It's very basic.
Yeah.
This disease has a lot of advantages in terms of like how it spreads among the human population. One of the big ones is you can be infected and contagious for a week or so before you even feel sick.
Yeah.
And so,
and even then, you might not even present as sick. You might not even get any symptoms. Well,
and it's very contagious. So there's no if you wait until like the disease becomes apparent to everyone, then you've waited too long. And that's what I worry about now, because at least where I'm at in Georgia, like there's no cases here at all as far as I know, but they're all in like Atlanta. But the thing is like we have no way of knowing if that is really true. Because that's just what's been reported, and we don't have any mechanism for checking because we don't fucking test. And I don't want to talk about coronavirus the whole time, but the reason I kind of brought it up now is because it's upended this whole debate and whole election for us. Like it really has.
The lifestyle of an American has probably changed more in the past week than it has in the past like 10 years at least. Like how you go about your life.
Well, some people might hear you say that and be like a little weirded out, depending on where they live. Because my understanding is that and we are still talking about millions of people being affected, so it's lots, maybe tens of millions. but we're mostly talking about larger cities that have already shut down. My town is still open for business here, and and like, I think a lot of places things are still like basically running as normal. The schools are beginning to shut down, but everything else is still running, although you are starting to see some changes in the restaurants. I've noticed like one of the drive-through, like one place around here is only doing drive-through now. Nobody's allowed inside. And so, and as far as I know, no one's had coronavirus here.
I did see online that a Starbucks removed all the chairs from the cafe, so you couldn't actually sit down and wait.
I just feel like they're punishing every Postmates, Uber Eats, DoorDash driver with that move.
Well, they don't even sit anyway, to be fair.
You show up, the order's not ready, and you want to sit down. It'd be nice to have a chair. That's what I'm saying. But it's like it's really upended everything here, and I'm sad to say that just speaking kind of cynically, I suppose, it's mostly cut for Joe Biden.
Well, that's the thing, is that I actually have no idea, because see, that's the thing when it comes to like the difference between the liberal base and the conservative base, at least, is that you can tell no matter what, Trump's base will still turn out, because even during a pandemic, they've convinced themselves that they'll be completely fine.
Oh yeah, they literally care more about the Trump white nationalism project than life itself. Like literally,
yeah,
they will die for it.
Like, yeah, there's the we've seen videos of like churches being like, "Oh, go just shake everyone's hands. That's what we're encouraging you to do. It's great. You'll be safe here."
Yeah, just like owning the libs by furthering a pandemic. Like that's literally what they're gonna do. And so on the Democratic side, like I tend to think that the kinds of people who are likely to turn out in a Democratic primary, they have internalized, because they watch the news too much, Trump bad. Trump is bad. Bad at his job, can't be president. And it's a pandemic, and it's sucking up a lot of the oxygen from the political news sphere. And what's left is also being taken up to a large degree by criticisms and critiques of the Trump administration's response and lack thereof. And what's left for anyone on the socially democratic left, broadly speaking, is it's really hard to fight and convince people that even though they're literally on the verge of panic and therefore like not really reasoning as well as they could, it's still really important to elect Bernie Sanders on the eve of debate.
And see, this is also the thing as well, is that because the liberal base will watch a lot of news and they'll see a lot about the pandemic, the actual older voters themselves, like it could swing both ways in that they're also convinced to turn out, but also at the same time, a lot of them could also be convinced not to turn out because they think they'll be in danger. Well, which frankly, they are actually in danger.
They absolutely should. I don't know when I'll have this out because it's almost Tuesday here already, but they really should be they should cancel elections. And I don't say that lightly.
They already did in Arizona.
Oh, so right on. And elections that we had early voting happening in Georgia already. Early voting's done. And I was going to go vote next Tuesday. Nope. I'm not. We're not doing that. Yeah, my date's been pushed back to May. So, and I mean, when they first announced that they were postponing the election, to be honest with you, my first gut response was, "Ooh, Brian Kemp's canceling an election. Great. I have great. Oh, I feel fucking great about that. Gee, I wonder what kind of rat fuckery this is." But really, in this case, honestly, it's probably the right call. It really is. Every state needs to be considering this.
Yeah.
But like, all that being said, like, I'm sorry, if you want to go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, no, I didn't have anything.
No, it's okay. all that being said, like, this was what really was overshadowing the Democratic debate that took place recently. the first one-on-one between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. The other thing that kind of overshadowed it, of course, was the recent rapid consolidation behind Biden and his growing strength in the polls.
Yeah.
And the Bernie campaign, what should they do? How should they respond? This has been like the talk of the leftosphere. I suppose we will talk a little bit about that, but I, in the spirit of doing something that most people don't do, would just like to say that neither I nor my guest really know how to run a political campaign, right?
I have a limited experience.
Okay.
Limited.
Okay. So maybe one of us knows a little bit about how to run.
Well, I know how to run a parliamentary based style, not an American one. So on that field, I defer to you.
It is, yeah, and it's obviously a lot different here. I mean, I would just say broadly speaking that neither of us really have any particular expertise in what Bernie Sanders should be doing. You know, we have our feelings, and they're driven by our values and our preferences, and we'll talk about them, of course. But you know, everybody out there speaking, you know, with a definitive message on like, no, you've got to do this, that, or the other thing. I mean, I'm always a little bit. It always feels a little bit mean or unfair to me because we're on the outside looking in, and it's not that our perspective is not as valuable or whatever, but it is but one. And I think that there are other considerations, other values that perhaps drive the Bernie Sanders campaign and Bernie Sanders himself to do and say what he does, even when we don't think it's optimal. And I'm kind of beating around the bush, so I'll just spell it out. I think, and if I'm not speaking for you, you know, please correct me when I'm done. But because we've talked about this, of course.
Yeah.
But broadly speaking, going into this debate, we wanted to see Bernie rip his throat out, like in the game parody satire. Like, exactly. Well, we really like go after this guy. And, you know, for my part, I'll tell you briefly the main reason why I wanted to see it do it. It is absolutely irresponsible to hand the Democratic nomination to this man for multiple reasons. The first of which, he is mentally unfit for office. That is clear. And the second is that Trump will probably whoop his ass. And so there is no upside whatsoever to, you know, hedging the bet at all. You must try to do everything and anything you can to stop this guy from getting the nomination. Yeah. But I don't know exactly if Nick, you feel exactly the same way as I do.
Well, being an international observer affords me the luxury of being able to actually enjoy these things slightly more than your average voter. So I obviously wanted to see Bernie, you know, use Biden's brain like a basketball, you know, as if he was the Harlem Globetrotters style, you know, throwing it around and passing it and whatnot. But like, I wanted to see that because that would be fun. Like, it'd be very enjoyable to watch. And also, because, yeah, that would be, in, you know, my humble opinion, the best way to go about obtaining more votes.
Yeah, so there's that too, just plainly speaking. I mean, and looking beyond, you know, there's already, it's bubbling up. They're getting ready to pre-blame. They're already pre-blaming the left for a Biden loss, right?
Yeah. Well, that was always on the cards.
Of course. But I feel like they're starting a bit earlier than they would normally. So, actually.
Yeah, well, if they're starting this early, it means they already know they're going to lose.
Exactly. And there's going to be a lot of accusations about the Bernie left, broadly speaking, blowing up the Democratic Party. But this is precisely the wrong way to think about it, I think, because the moment Joe Biden becomes the nominee, that's really the moment the Democratic Party has blown itself up.
Yeah,
I think.
Like,
and so that's why, like, there's, you know, you have to do everything you can to stop that from happening.
Yeah, because I would just like to point out the reason I think that Biden will lose, and obviously by, you know, extension the Democratic Party would be blown up, is because come the election day, you will know at least a couple of things. one, that Joe Biden, the whole world will probably end up knowing that Joe Biden wanted to cut Social Security. 2, Joe Biden has dementia. 3, that Joe Biden's son is Joe Biden and his son.
Joe Biden's son is awesome. You mean?
Yes, but also that they're extremely corrupt. More like compared to the email thing, Joe Biden going on that energy company board is very easy to sell.
Hunter Biden, you mean? But yes.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, Hunter Biden, obviously. But like the right will always be able to stir up, anger within their own base. This Hunter Biden stuff will not only stir up the right wing base, it'll depress Democrats as well, because it's obvious corruption.
Yeah, and that's the game, I think, because the truth is that Trump is not incredibly strong in general. His base is close to maxed out in terms of enthusiasm. There's only so much that he can really do to gin up more. And so the other lever for him to lean on is drag the other candidate down into the mud so bad that, like, nobody wants to turn out for them. And I just want to clarify one thing. By blow up the Democratic Party, I should be a little more measured by what I'm saying.
Terrorist.
No. Well, no, not that. And also, I don't mean like no Democrat will ever win office again or anything like that. But I mean, like at a presidential level and the Senate as well, probably, we're going to be basically shut out of power structurally 80 to 90 to perhaps all the time. Yeah. And so getting anything done in that scenario that's good for the left becomes impossible. And that's kind of, that might be, not to be over dramatic, but the game for the planet, because we don't have a whole lot of time. You have to have hard environmental barriers that we're coming up against. Anyway, all that being said is prelude. I want to talk about the debate itself now and kind of run through more or less what happened. I assume most people like watching this probably saw it or listened to it already, but we watched it together, and everybody else was streaming it, but we decided to like watch it, wait a day, and then try to digest our thoughts.
We wanted to give smart opinions, not dumb ones. Thank you very much.
Well, and also, I did kind of want to see what, if anything, different corners of the political commentariat said about the debate. And so that was helpful too. We'll talk a little bit about that. But broadly speaking, like when the debate started, coronavirus is basically everywhere. Like it is in the fact that like they don't handshake, there's no audience. It's what they start talking about immediately. And it is, don't get me wrong, I lament it's making it harder for the Bernie Sanders Social Democratic left to make any kind of case in the Democratic primary while it's going on, but it is like serious. People should talk about it.
Exactly.
Like, I'm not, no,
it's sort of hard to ignore a pandemic.
Exactly. Well, if at least if you're not a Republican, it's
yeah. Although if you're a Republican, it's a little easier. You're a pussy if you don't go outside.
Exactly. But anyway, for about the first half hour, I'd say, Bernie didn't do what we wanted really at all. Right.
Well, yeah, this kind of debate was not one where it was like, oh, you can just sit on your morals. You actually have to go out of your way to do something.
Yeah, like, and really contrast you with the other guy and not just answer the questions that you're asked.
Yeah.
That's what they were trying to do with originally their original plan of an audience-driven town hall format.
Yeah.
Like, because they say, and notice, I think a lot of the questions specifically, in earlier Democratic primaries, the questions were designed, it'd be like, blah, 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 Kamala Harris, would you like to take this opportunity to attack Joe Biden? Joe Biden, would you like to respond? Elizabeth Warren, would you like to take this opportunity to clarify whether or not Bernie Sanders hates women? Like that, like those kinds of questions, right?
Fun stuff.
Whereas now they're just like, questions about the candidates themselves mostly. That was kind of telling to me. But for whatever reason, like Bernie had a tough job and he didn't really do it in the first half hour. And then as soon as I really started to like lament the state of affairs, and I was like, Jesus, man, like get mad, dude. Like they're not just trying to steal it for a competent, if terribly right-wing Hillary Clinton. They're trying to give it to a terribly right-wing, senile, idiot who's clearly not fit to tie his own shoes, let alone like be president. So like go get blood.
Yeah, exactly.
And he did finally start to do it some.
Yeah.
He didn't do it as well. He didn't get the critical hits, bro. Like he didn't hit the boss's weak spot point,
Like I was under no, like I never believed that Bernie was going to be like, oh, Joe Biden's got dementia, honey, sit down, go home. Like,
no, because he can't do that. He can't.
Yeah, he can't. He was never going to do that. But I thought going into it that he would be at least be like, look at Joe Biden. He would lose to Donald Trump if he, if he becomes the nominee. Like I thought he would at least do something like that. And
and there were a couple times. I mean, he's always more comfortable focusing on the record and the issues. And there were a couple times where he did needle him a little bit on that. And
Joe Biden lied.
I mean, yeah, and it is true. Like a lot of people pointed out, and it was really obvious. Like Joe Biden's strategy was just get there and lie, and the moderators aren't going to moderate him at all. They would challenge Bernie here and there, but they never challenged anything Joe Biden had to say. Bernie had to both be his opponent and his moderator, which is it's like I was telling somebody else. It doesn't, even if you're like the best, smartest, brightest, most eloquent politician on the planet, you give somebody two jobs to do at once. They can't do both of them perfectly usually, right?
Yeah.
Like you can do one of them perfectly or both of them really good, but doing both of them perfectly is a tall order, and he didn't really do that. Like telling the audience like go to YouTube, look it up, is not effective. Even if like you should absolutely go check, because Joe Biden, like there's footage everywhere. Joe Biden has been ready to sell out Social Security for 40 years. You don't think he's going to do it when he's in office with the Republicans? He's been talking so much about how much he loves working with them. What do you think they're going to ask him to work with him on?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's probably as good as he could have expected. It's as good as we could have hoped for with that kind of line, which is like, if there's going to be no obvious fact-checking at the thing, and not that fact-checking works, but like, in real time...
Or just challenging him,
Yeah, exactly.
Like, aggressively challenging him. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like, if the moderator's not going to be like, hey, Joe, you actually did say such and such about Social Security, like, in live.
Yeah, several times they would say, like, Joe Biden, you said or did this, whatever. What say you? And Joe would just be like, no, I didn't do that. Look, here's the truth. And they would just be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I think another big takeaway is that CNN is the worst news network to host these debates.
Yeah, absolutely. And like all of them have been bad, but CNN has consistently been the worst. I agree. I believe I've said that before. I'll have to check the tape, but
hey folks, CNN, the corrupt news network, if you ask me.
They are, seriously. Beyond that, there was a pretty effective dust up on super PACs and who's funding Joe Biden, and Joe Biden had some numbers and facts ready to go.
Yeah, here we go.
About how his own campaign is incredibly cash poor, and you shouldn't look at these other large super PACs over here whose donations are much, much, much larger. Which is like that's the game. That's what you do. Like it's I don't know. It doesn't even seem that sophisticated to me. You'd think some fucking political reporters and commentators would figure this out. Like, yes, super PACs are illegal. They can take unlimited dark money donations and run as many televisions as they want. So, like, if you're the corporate billionaire funded candidate, what you do is you tell all your billionaire friends, like, hey, don't try to flood my campaign with money. Just super PACs over here, like, go put the money over there. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, that would help me a lot more, and that's how you get your average contributions like down to what sound like a reasonable number, even though you are absolutely in the pocket of the same motherfuckers you've been in the pocket of your entire career, Mr. Senator from MasterCard. Senator, where the fuck, Delaware. But all that being said, he was like 9 super PACs. You remember this, right?
Yeah, I remember Bernie has 9 super PACs.
Yeah, and I think for those nerds who actually care about, well, how many super PACs does he actually have? I think technically there are 3 super PACs that support him.
I think they're not super though. I think they're just regular PACs.
Yeah, the super is, yes, because the super, I think that usually refers to like the amount of money the donations are. Usually, like you can give.
Yeah.
There's no limit. So these are political action committees, but they're like associated with the nurses union.
Yeah, he's in the pocket of big nurses. Folks.
Yeah, like there's I think a couple unions have PACs, and then there's like one more, and
one of them is the Sunrise Movement.
I don't know if they're a PAC though, but I can't remember. Anyway, there's like 9 groups, and a bunch of them are just like the fucking like socialists who don't want to die, teenagers for an Earth with breathable air, the Broad Coalition for Progressive Change.
One of them is Our Revolution, and they've only spent like $20,000.
Yes. These are quote unquote outside groups.
Dark money.
That is true, and yes, in some cases, like the money may be dark, and you don't know who wrote a check for $150 for like cutlery or whatever for the fucking spaghetti dinner that raised $1,000 or whatever the fuck, like these are like small. It's a small ball shit, and Joe, he set it up. He said, "You have 9," and Bernie laughed in his face and said, "Name them." And Joe Biden said, "Come on, man, give me a break." And Bernie said, "I won't give you a break, Joe, but look, here's the main issue." And then he went on to make a broader critique about money and politics, and that was the mistake, I think.
Yeah. See, yeah, like, if, in my opinion, had Bernie done the whole, like, I'm not going to give you a break, and folks, if you're watching at home, this is exactly why Joe Biden would lose to Trump. I think that's a very good, like, in my opinion.
Yeah, he could have said that. But the thing is I know why he doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And I don't agree. I know, it's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
Because I was talking with somebody else about this, with some other people. Broadly speaking, the knock on Bernie, and it has been for years now, from the liberal or shit lib wing of the Democratic Party, has been like, he's a spoiler. He's vain. He just in it for himself. He just wants power. He's a ne'er-do-wells con artist, suckering people into his so-called movement, right? And he is out to, here's the cherry that they always put on top. He's out to defy the Democratic Party, break it up, burn it down, wound it, hurt it, whatever, and get Republicans elected. And Bernie Sanders himself, I'm convinced, is incredibly, despite all that, he's actually incredibly sensitive to this critique. He actually really does believe that it's important that he not do that, like really badly. And I'm not just talking about this cycle, but his whole career, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
it's why, like, even though Hillary Clinton was terrible, and in a lot of minds, it would have been, if not agreeable to them, understandable if he wasn't full-throatedly behind her in the general election, and he did it anyway. And now he's looking at the same scenario, possibly with Joe Biden, And he really believes that Joe Biden is preferable to Trump and that the Democrats have to win. And I was there with him until like, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, believe it or not. Really. Like it's been that soon that I've really started to tip the other way, man. But I've talked plenty. I don't know what you have to say about all that before I go on.
I usually would fall into the same camp that Mr. Bernard Sanders would fall into. But literally, this is probably one of the very few cases that I can think of where if you told me you lived in a swing state and you were like, you know, I'm just going to sit out. I'm not going to put anyone at the presidential level. I'm not going to vote for that on that line. I would be like, you know what? That makes perfect sense. I don't blame you. And you,
which is not even the same as saying I would do that. It's just, you know, hey, I feel you.
Yeah, like my preference in all these things is usually to be like, oh, okay, you know what? They suck. You know, they're not the best. They can, but you know, they're at least not Donald Trump, or they're at least not the Republicans or whatever, or they're not the conservative option. It's hard to make that case for Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. I'm sorry.
I agree, and I think the Hillary analog, and I'm sorry if people are tired of hearing about this, but it's useful to me because, you know, I didn't like it. I hated it. But you know what? When the question came up in the general, like, am I going to vote for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or neither? Hillary Clinton, as much as I didn't like her personally or her politics, on the competency issue alone, that's really what sold me, you know? Because I saw how Trump behaved and how he talked and how he didn't know anything. And I just thought, like, you know, he's going to be evil and stupid. You know, like he's not like our government's going to break down if he's in charge of it. And so at least if I have Hillary Clinton, like some of that kind of stuff won't happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Joe Biden doesn't have that card to play with me particularly or anyone else, because I am very sensitive to particularly in regards to immigration and people here who are undocumented and the terrorism that Trump is unleashing upon those communities of color, all kinds of vulnerable populations. I do, and I haven't forgotten them. I'm just not convinced that putting Joe Biden in charge instead would really make a meaningful difference on the margins for those people. I'm not saying I'm sure it wouldn't, but I'm definitely not sure that it would. Because, like, have you seen that guy? He doesn't know what the fuck he's doing or where he is.
He was also the ARC. He was part of the Obama administration, as in like part of that deportation scheme where they deported millions of people. I think they still deported more than Trump, essentially. If I recall, I think Joe Biden and Obama deported more people than Trump. I
mean, they had more time, but
true.
But I think that is true. On the same kind of vein, in a less obvious way, Joe Biden really demonstrated his lack of fitness for the office, I think, and why he's really not going to why it's still a question to me. An open question that he would be an improvement as head of the executive branch over Trump. And it was his over-promising and pandering, believe it or not. Did you get this sense from him?
During the debate?
Yeah, okay, for example, coronavirus. You know, Joe Biden's up there, he's strong, and he's got a bold plan for what he would do, which we'll leave aside the fact that, you know, he's not at the earliest, he'll be president next November, or next January. So he's not, it's gonna be a little late for all this, buddy. But nevertheless, his plan was yes, we need bold, active leadership to confront this crisis. All medical care related to the coronavirus pandemic should be free. Anyone who misses a paycheck from their job should get it and be made whole. Anyone who can't pay their rent or mortgage during the duration of the crisis should have it paid for them. and he's just gonna do all like he would just do all that, and also like, oh, don't forget, also I'll mobilize the army, and like, okay, great, and like some of that in a limited way, like you can get the National Guard involved, and some of that stuff the president could probably help with by executive order, but like that's the plan. I'm going to declare all medical care related to the coronavirus free and deploy the army. Like that's my leadership.
You know, so you know how Emperor Caligula sent the Roman army to stab the ocean or whatever because he was declaring war on Poseidon? Joe Biden is just going to send the army around to old people's homes and just shoot them because they're sick. And be like, oh, we're fighting coronavirus.
There's no more coronavirus case here. This guy's dead of a gunshot wound, not coronavirus. Literally, I mean, I don't know. That and the sort of the stuff about Joe Biden and like how he's gonna get what he's gonna do in terms of like healthcare. You know, like he says he's the guy who can get it done and build and like restore dignity to the office and competency or whatever, but like to me it's not at all clear that he knows what competency even looks like in a president anymore. And he's going to be the tool of the same interests that he's always really been a tool of, but just more so because he'll have less and less ability to like mentally formulate how he could even like think differently, and he'll just be convinced, that like, what he's doing isn't good.
People accused Hillary Clinton of being like, she would pander to every room or whatever the hell. Like she didn't have any set values essentially. Like Joe, you could probably slap like the logo of a pharmaceutical company on Joe Biden's face, and it would be the exact. And like he's just that sold out at this point because of his lack of cognitive abilities. Like that's what we're talking about at this point with him.
And his ability to go up there and lie about his record so blatantly in obviously false ways. People have focused a lot, like, all politicians, like, I mean, even the best of them will stretch things or get things wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
And like Hillary Clinton was a huge liar too, really was. But actually with Joe Biden, like, he's always done that shit in his career. He's always been lying about this shit. But the difference now is twofold. The first is that like he's lost any ability to deflect in a way that doesn't make him seem incredibly pissed off and defensive about it.
Yeah, no, he's lost all ability to do any sort of spin.
Yeah, at any level. He's just like, no, I didn't do that, or like you're lying. How dare you?
You're a dog-faced pony soldier.
Yeah, it sounds like why don't you go over Trump? If you're gonna feel like that.
Oh, I would challenge you to a push-up match, Buster.
Fat. There's that, and then there's also the fact that I really do feel like at this point it's taking a great deal of concentration, effort, and time on his behalf to just remember what to say. And so the amount of time that's spent by him formulating what he should say is going to be diminished. That stuff's all been outsourced to other people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we're talking about a democratic version of Bush and Cheney, essentially.
Yeah, and like he's good at lying because like he's practiced it during his career for years, yes, but also like he's not even bothering to think about what's true, which is like which makes lying a lot easier when you can just believe in the moment because you can only work your brain for 7 minutes at a time that what you're lying about in that moment is true and that you really didn't vote for the Iraq war. Or whatever the like bullshit you're telling the audience. It's pretty amazing to watch. Normally it wouldn't work or be effective, I think, except that we're kind of in a new environment as a country right now.
Yeah.
Like I'll just finish up with this and I'll let you go. But I just really want to reiterate how much I think the Democratic primary electorate, they have internalized the message Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad. And that's as far as it's gone, and that's all they've been told, and that's true. And you're seeing just how far that message gets you. It might win Joe Biden enough votes in the cable news obsessed watching lib audience to win the Democratic primary. It is not going to be nearly enough to win a general election.
Like, just to recenter it back towards the actual primary, which is tomorrow, and whoever wins at this stage, but probably by the time this comes out, we'll probably have a winner.
I just say this, like, people, the predictions were for a while, Joe Biden, good states for him tomorrow, but with the coronavirus scare and Arizona's being canceled, so I don't even know if the other elections will happen. So it could. Yeah. Nobody really knows what's going to happen because we don't know who's going to show up to vote.
We could see no young person turn out to vote or no old people turn out to vote, depending on how the coronavirus message has been.
Or just no one come out to vote at all because the elections are canceled.
You're true, exactly. Lowest record voter turnout of any election.
0.
But yeah, just to center that, I guess, as I was saying, is that really, it could go either way, because people could look at this to be like, you know what, there's just too much going on. I just want a simple message. Just, I don't want to have to think about a lot of this stuff. I just want a normal person back in the White House. And that obviously leads them to Joe Biden. Or we could see, which has happened before, definitely, which is that, wait a second, there's a lot of bad shit going on. And it's clear we've gotten here from, just following the same rules. So we can't do that anymore. So we've got to turn to someone who's, who's actually going to try and change it up. And that obviously leads to a Bernie Sanders victory. But it's hard to tell with everything that's going on. So I don't know.
It's insanely hard to tell. And I mean, I tend to think most election pundits, even in the best of times, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And now, like, there's no way they know what they're talking about. I think.
If anyone's telling you that, a certain thing's going to happen, buddy, turn them off.
I mean, it's interesting times.
Yeah,
we live in. I wonder what you think. How the left looks after 4 years of Joe Biden. Like, let's assume not the worst case scenario. Well, let's assume two scenarios that are both bad. One's maybe it's contestable which one's worse than the other. But Joe Biden is nominated in both, and he either becomes the president for 4 years or Trump beats his ass and stays president for 4 more years. At the end of that, the left. I tend to think, maybe I just need something to pin some hope on, that like we might actually have a shot, because Joe Biden is their last gasp of striving at legitimacy that no longer exists in our institutions.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing. Joe Biden is the last big shot named Democrat who has name recognition, like, on a national level. You can say Pete Buttigieg or Kamala Harris or whatever, but not to the same degree.
That reminds me, actually, of something. Because things have moved so fast that, like, a lot of this seems like ancient history, but I want to set something up for you in the audience now that was true just like literally a few weeks ago, okay? So a few weeks ago, Bernie Sanders is riding high. He's scaring people. And they've gone to Klobuchar, to Pete. They've already looked at Biden. They've looked at Warren. And everywhere they're looking, can you beat him? Can you beat him? Can you beat him? Can you beat him? And the answer keeps coming back no. To the extent to where they're so fucking terrified by that reality that they're openly musing about a contested convention and fantasizing about drafting Nancy Pelosi for president of the United States to stop Bernie Sanders, who would in the scenario presumably have a large plurality but not majority of pledged delegates. That's where they were at. And they were so freaked out that they were not only openly contemplating that, they were ready to let Mike Bloomberg take a shot. One of the most hateful, condescending, charisma-free motherfuckers who's ever graced this planet. Looking at his face is to hate him. Unless your checkbook is fat as hell, dude. And they actually let him give it a try because they looked at Joe Biden. Joe Biden's been running for months. And they said, nah, dude, I don't think so. And the only thing that changed is Bernie Sanders got scarier to them, because I think we can all agree that Joe Biden didn't suddenly get much smarter and sharper in that time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He didn't win them over with his, executive, brilliant plan that would, steal votes from the left, but also keep the moderates happy. Like, he didn't have that up his back pocket.
So it's like, now that we're in a crisis, he is all of a sudden the safe choice. Like, the Democratic Party institutions and like the people who surround them and are like, kind of culturally affiliated with like the New York Times editorial board, the Des Moines Register endorsing, somebody on the eve of the Iowa caucuses, like these kinds of things. They all looked at Joe and they were all like, we can't pick him. And they didn't really want to say why exactly, but I mean, I think it's obvious, like people, I don't care if anybody says he has dementia. I don't care if people say he has Alzheimer's. For my part, I will keep medical diagnoses out of my mouth as best I can and just say...
Not me, though. Joe Biden is a dumb fuck who has dementia. Go retire.
But whether you think he's a dumb fuck or has dementia, or you just think that his brain...
I think he's a dumb fuck because he has dementia.
Or you think that his brain just doesn't work well enough to be president of the United States. It doesn't matter.
But yeah, all the above.
Yeah, like the dude, he's not fit for office, and I don't need to go to medical school to figure that out.
Yeah.
And like this gaslighting campaign that's been going on for the past few weeks, it's been very new, and it's holding for now. But we're in kind of unprecedented times, both politically and like with the pandemic happening in America.
Okay, so yeah, do we want to get back to the scenarios of
what the left looks like? You mean
yes.
after? Okay, yeah, sure. What do you think? What do you think the left in America, broadly speaking, the Bernie coalition, after either 4 more years of Trump or 4 years of Biden, are they weaker? Are they stronger? Can we say?
I think there's a few variables that need to take place just to really smooth out this one, because, like, obviously this is Bernie Sanders' last hurrah in terms of running, so he's not going to be the progressive champion after this one, unfortunately, because he's too dang old. But okay, let's start off with the first one, which is Biden wins. Hooray, Biden wins. No Trump, no more Trump. We can go back to brunch, folks. It's all good. So, assuming Biden decides not to run in 2024, because I think that's what he's indicated so far.
He's not going to, or at least he says he's not.
Yeah, it'll be down to whoever he picks as vice president will become the nominee. And obviously, the Republicans would probably take back the House in the 2022 midterms, most likely. That's what I'm guessing. So, not only is the left more shut out of power, but even the regular Democrats are back to square one again. And you could argue that in that scenario, more left candidates appear in the House and maybe even the Senate if we get a bit lucky. But yeah, so Biden decides not to run, and it comes down to whoever he picks as vice president. If that vice president's popular, we could just be looking at a straight shot, no actual regular primary like in 2012. Or, depending on who it is, we could see some progressive who will appear out of the woodwork, who will run a 2016-style Sanders campaign.
See, but here's what you've made me... I feel bad for saying this, but I'm not even saying I'm sure about this, but it makes me think that it might be true that a Trump presidency would be better for the left because...
Well...
Sorry, go ahead.
I was about to say, well, like, and obviously I was about to get into the Trump wins a second term scenario here. Okay, so yeah. It's election night, November 2020. You know, Joe Biden, everyone knows that Joe Biden has dementia. We actually haven't seen him for a month because he might have died, but who knows? And Trump...
Nobody can prove it.
Yeah, and Trump wins the, 48 states or whatever. Big victory. Don't know what the House looks like. Maybe the Democrats pick something up. Who knows? Midterms come along. Trump's continues to do exactly what he does. Maybe the Senate's pick up. The Democrats pick up the Senate, that would be nice to have, I guess. You could pass a few laws here and there. Maybe even get back to 2006 numbers, which would be amazing.
I just think, like, if Trump wins and beats Biden, that further discredits the Democratic Party nationally. Yes. And I'm not saying like I'm hoping for this scenario or anything like that, or that I've even made a decision about how I myself am going to vote. But I am just saying that, should Biden lose to Trump in the general, it will prove our point even better than if he wins and then everybody realizes that, oh shit, like he actually can't repair our institutions in any way and make them better.
If Biden loses in 2020, assuming he's the nominee, of course, the Democratic 2024 primary will be the most open one we've had. It'll make 2020 look like fucking a cakewalk by comparison.
Because if he wins, then like you said, his vice president will be automatically, if not automatically the front runner for the Democratic nomination, like the strong favorite, if not prohibitive one, right? Yeah, exactly. And presumably whoever he picks in that role is not going to be our friend.
Exactly.
And so like we're going to have to beat an invigorated challenger who's just strong enough to keep the Democratic Party's nomination, but is in no way strong enough to beat a new Trumpist style Republican presidential candidate. And that if we lose again, then the left is definitely in big trouble. And about 2 election cycles out is about as much time as I would give us as a country. You know what I mean? Because after that, the longer you leave the fascists or right-wing authoritarians, if you prefer, in power, the less likely you're going to be able to divulge them through elections.
But here's the thing as well, though, about when we talk about at least the right in America, is that like after Trump there isn't another Trump, so you're not going to have a Republican nominee who gets up on stage, talks about we need to build the wall, and then diverts to, and also the Oscars, they chose a bad movie.
Yeah, who used to be a really popular game show host on network television. Yeah. He doesn't have that.
Trump embodies the cultural, war. He embodies the culture war that conservatives love, and essentially what riles them up. Like another all the other Republicans who would be potential 2024 nominees, they know that is cringe. Essentially, like there's obviously some lunatics out there, but all the serious ones are not going to talk. They're not going to talk about the Oscars like on stage in the same way Trump does. Like They could talk about like, oh, we got a great American film one this year. Woo, USA,
Yeah,
stuff like
that. They won't have the same advantages in terms of being an entertainer or a showman, or with the pre-built reputation of successful, rich, gold-plated dude, which is basically who he was. Even though like we heard endlessly throughout the campaign how that was all a lie, and they ran against that, and it didn't work. But so like whoever they nominate is going to be like won't have those advantages. What advantages they will have though are 4 more years of a lot of Republican control, a lot of the apparatuses of power, specifically around the census and congressional redistricting, courts, and how all these bodies legally manage and adjudicate our elections, because they, in a creepy way, like, but actually a very smart one, if kind of Machiavellian, I suppose. The first thing Republicans tend to do when they get into power, about tied with giving rich people money, because they also do this at the same time. With one hand, they give rich people money, but with the other hand, at the same time, they immediately start looking for ways to preserve their own power.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so we can barely win elections, so like let's make elections way less democratic, like small d. As much as we can. Like, oh, black people don't want to vote for our party because we're organizing around pseudo-white nationalism at this point. Cool. Well, we'll just, make sure that we don't let black people vote as easily. That kind of thing.
If you needed an analogy out there, like, oh, how should I think about this? Think of it this way. The Republicans are building a jail, and you're currently in it, but they haven't put the bars in yet. But they're going to if you keep letting them get away with it. If you don't get rid of them, they'll put the bars in and you'll be trapped forever.
Let me ask you a question, because I have my own analogy. Do they have cars in Australia? Has the automobile made it there?
Do we have cars?
Yeah, has the automobile made it to Australia
yet? Yes, it has, actually.
Oh, okay.
The Ford T1 model, though. So
man.
A lot of things, exciting things coming down the line.
still just in the black color, or you guys have multiple colors yet? Oh, just the black.
Yeah, we don't know about we've never heard of blue. We don't know what blue is.
But my analogy was like in the Democratic primary, because I kind of want to close with this, because it ain't over yet. I mean, it does look more likely that Joe's going to win than Bernie, but like we said, this race has turned on a dime before, and we just had something really major start to happen in the United States in terms of the pandemic. Nobody knows, but my analogy was this: if you compare picking a Democratic nominee to buying a car, right? Well, let's say you got to buy a car, and the money's no problem, taxes are no problem, whatever. All you have to do is choose what car, and you can have any one you want. Okay, you have a voucher or whatever,
a coupon.
And so you're going, yeah, and the point is, all you have to do is choose which car you want that you think fits you best, right? That's the point. So you're going around the lot and you're looking at all the cars or whatever, and you come to like the Joe Biden car.
A long car.
Yeah. First of all, the car is like 3 city blocks long. It's weird. Yeah, it's crazy long. Okay.
It's a classic car. It's a classic automobile.
A classic automobile.
It's something your dad would have loved to have had when he was a child.
And despite its like elegant longness in every way, you kind of look at it and you drive around a bit, and you have some concerns, right? It seems like the brake pads are made of wood. One of the tires appears to be uninflated entirely.
And you got
riding on the rim, right? Like, yeah.
You also got told it had air conditioning, but that was actually a lie. That's not in the model.
No, in fact, the air conditioning setting, in fact, the heater is on all the time. It's blowing hot air in your face no matter what. It's just tons of fucking problems, right? And, voters went around to like these cars or whatever when they started running. Some of them did anyway. But also like a lot of newspaper people, media people, party insiders, Democratic National Committee members, you know, they also were looking at all these cars, and they saw the Joe Biden car months ago. And Joe Biden's people were like, get in this car, baby. It's going to beat Trump. It's going to be awesome. And they all looked at each other and were like, I mean, we're not really sure which one of these other cars, which also kind of suck, we're getting in, but we're not getting in this one.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to die. The wrong car looks like it would kill us all. And that guy, that car that they were looking at, that they're now all getting in. So like, that car's the same car, man. It's the same fucking car. The reason I know Joe Biden's not fit for office is because the New York Times editorial board had the chance to meet the first black president's vice president for 8 years, the most accomplished statesman running in the Democratic Party. They interviewed him and they had the opportunity to endorse him. And they were like, no, you know what? Instead, we're going to endorse the idea of a girl boss.
Yeah. He told them, he went to the New York Times and sat there for an hour and told them he wasn't going to die. That's the
yeah, like, no, I can't be stopped. I can't be. I am the Highlander. Like,
yeah.
I mean, and they didn't endorse him. Des Moines Register didn't endorse him. Like, people did not line up behind this guy until, like, he got his voters in South Carolina, which, like, you know, this is getting a little bit too far afield, but, you know, as much as I respect the older black population in South Carolina, like, they made the wrong choice, and I understand why they made it. We could talk more about that maybe another time, but that was just, you know, the coalescing event for a bandwagon effect.
Yeah. And the reason they picked Joe Biden after South Carolina is because he got a higher number on a fucking spreadsheet after the election. They were like, oh shit, okay, gotta pick this guy. He got the best number. That's it.
Well, they were desperate to find someone to coalesce behind, because I think they were all, you know, if I'm being honest, we're not saying this out loud, so I can't prove it, but a lot of them were realizing, oh, our fantasies of a contested convention, like, that's us. Like, that needle is incredibly hard to thread, and maybe we're being a bit insane. So we need another plan, I think.
Yeah.
All that being said, at the end of the debate, of course, they went back to coronavirus, and I wanted to talk to you about something just kind of random that I saw. And it actually involves a third foreign country. I'm not sure if the Australian educational system is aware of the existence of a country called Germany. Are you aware?
Oh, Germany. I thought we were going to talk about how Australia was in the shadow of China. Like
oh, shit, I forgot all about that. Well, we can do that for a second. We'll do that for a second. Yes. Okay. Because that was important. And I, you know, on the left, I'm not sure how much people really care about foreign policy or our military. I actually kind of care about that stuff a little more than normal, because I come from two military families, and
if I had to say, like, most people on the American left, the extent of their foreign policy is that no foreign wars and less interventionism, which
is absolutely a great place to start, though.
Yeah, it's a perfectly reasonable place to be.
it really is, and I can't stress enough how much I agree with both of those things. But that being said, you know, it came up in the context of climate change and other places, and it was really telling to me. And I don't know how it's going to play with the audience, but, you know, in addition to panning Joe's plans as not nearly ambitious enough, which I think Bernie did very effectively, Joe also chose to talk a lot about how we need to force, his word, other countries to live up to their commitments. And the moderators themselves, they're in the same team, they were asking questions about how should we punish China, or you know, how can we make them pay for climate change, their share of climate change, this sort of idea, right? Like, that we are the enforcer here to enforce like fairness on the world stage. You know, we've got a long history of that kind of rhetoric. And it, whatever our notion of fairness is from moment to moment, our methods for enforcing that fairness pretty consistent, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And, they're not good. But he talked a lot about, how right now, there are countries in the shadow of brutally authoritarian regimes who are getting ready, it's implied, to perhaps harm you, invade you in some way. And I had no idea that like Australia is basically like a siege state, right? Okay, so how big exactly is the Chinese naval blockade surrounding your continent?
Like, the irony of picking Australia as in the shadow of China is like to negate the entire, like, I don't expect most Americans or, for example, Joe Biden to understand like the history of Australia. Like, to
also every Japanese person and Korean person is just like rolling their eyes, like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Like, if you had to pick any nation in the shadow of China, you could say Japan or Vietnam and maybe South Korea.
Yeah, Korea also, like the Korean Peninsula, all those nations around there. China's a very large regional power. Obviously, they're kind of literally in their shadow, in that like their partners and their political considerations are very important. Yeah, obviously, Australia though, I don't know.
If you do not know the history of Australia, I would just like to tell you that Australia is probably, without exception, one of the most racist places in the world. Like in terms of immigration as well.
My audience probably is mostly aware of this, but the funny thing about Australia is that in terms of like the settler colonial mindset and speaking English, they're actually like a better analog than, say, like Canada for us. I'd say, even though Canada can also be useful to compare ourselves to sometimes.
Yeah. Like, I just want to put it, like, even in our day and age, the insinuation that a person has Chinese influence over their politics is enough to force them out of our federal government. Like even if just like the far right in this country, they put in, so I think it was the tax office over here, like your version of the IRS, put in I think it was squat toilets or whatever in like one building or one room or whatever. And the far right said that was essentially a Chinese invasion.
Oh, dude, Australian bathroom wars.
But not even over gender.
No, just over like Western versus Eastern style toilets, I guess, right?
Like the second longest serving prime minister from 1996 to 2007, in the late 80s, when he was like the leader of the opposition party, said that he was concerned about Asian migration to Australia. I would like to point out that as I sit here today, 92% of Australians are descendant from Europeans. That's the same continent. So that means there's 92% of Australia is white. And we are concerned about being demographically changed by the Chinese. Please do, like, this is one of the most racist places on earth. Please.
Yeah, in some ways, I don't want to be too hard on Australia, but it's almost a little more naked over there, the sort of like white supremacy. But or at least comparable, in some ways, I'd say.
Another little tidbit of history that I'll just finish on with the Australia stuff is that
I love this.
There's an influential Australian founder, not like as in he was part of any legislative stuff, but he wrote a famous book that's pretty racist, but essentially there's a concept that was invented called the working man's paradise, which is essentially socialism for white people and white people alone, if you had to break it down in a very simple concept, or basic social democracy for white people.
So wait, does the resulting society have non-white people in it, but in subservient roles, or does it just exclude them altogether?
Based on what followed, it was the latter, which is the exclusion of all other races.
Oh, sweet. So that sounds fine. This
is a real thing that happened as well. After Federation, the Australian Parliament issued the White Australia policy, which was essentially that if you didn't speak English, you weren't allowed in, which is even more racist than regular, like, white supremacy. because it excludes.
And this is where Trump and the modern Republican Party are at too. Not just with the language, but the idea that like, I mean, hopefully to you audience and to you Nick, it doesn't sound good, but to some people it sounds reasonable and maybe even good. You know, every people should have a nation, and every nation should, you know, govern itself and decide who's in and who's out, and strive and compete on the world stage, and that's how we progress as a species. And you know, that is actually horrifying.
Like what? So before Federation, there was slavery in Australia, because in my home state, if you go up north, there used to be sugar plantations, and you can imagine that, well, white people are not going to work in those horrible conditions. So they would go around to Polynesian islands and literally invite whole islands onto a ship and then just take off back to Australia. After the White Australia policy was implemented, they kicked all those people out, as in they took them on boats and took them back to the islands from where they came from, literally. And we're talking about people who had literally never seen those lands before, didn't speak those languages, and were just kicked out of Australia because they weren't white. That's what we're...
Much like in America, we will just today and in the past, you know, you deport somebody who's maybe even technically an American citizen, wrong, so illegally, but doesn't speak English, and you know, you send them back to Mexico, but actually they're originally from like Nicaragua or Colombia, and maybe they don't even speak Spanish. Maybe they're actually from one of the indigenous peoples of South or Central America. You know, it doesn't matter. We're going to drop them off in the capital of Mexico, wherever the fuck. And
like, I won't even get in. I'll get into it a different day, because this will be an overload otherwise of just how racist this place is. But
Australia is great.
Yeah, like the way the Aboriginals, they tried to, shall we say, change them for the better, to use a nice quote surrounding it, is very bad.
Kidnapping, right?
Well, essentially, it was basically trying to eugenics the blackness out of their skin.
The very, very, very last thing that I have for you, and I don't know if you maybe think this is stupid or whatever, but I actually did want to ask you about Germany. Something I heard Angela Merkel say. But before I do that, I just wanted to ask you first, in your politicians in the Labour Party, or even maybe liberals, maybe conservatives, but really anyone, how often, if ever, do they speak of the word solidarity or social solidarities or solidarity generally? Ever? Does that word come up at all?
Maybe in the Labour Party, like once or twice a year. It's rare-ish. It's very rare.
In America, it's basically non-existent in both parties, and you can find a sliver of it. People say it here and there. I think Bernie's uttered it once or twice. And so maybe on his wing of the party, you might hear somebody talk of solidarity. But in terms of like, you know, like a national address, big speeches by big politicians, lead presumably coalitions, you know, that have lots of people in them. So they're very broad. The word solidarity, like, basically never really comes up at all.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm talking about solidarity is has less to do with any sort of like Marxist angle, actually, or even socialist angle. It actually has to do with, like I said, something I heard Angela Merkel say. Now, Angela Merkel, for just to remind Nick, who probably already knows this, but the audience too, Angela Merkel is at best a centrist, I'd say.
Yeah, she's part of the Christian Democrats.
Yeah, yeah, I believe so.
That's like their right party.
Yeah, I think you could make I think there are good cases that I'd probably agree with, that broadly speaking, she's like center right. But on some things, compared to an American or maybe even Australian position, she might appear to be a little more left. It's a little bit fuzzy, but certainly describing her as a centrist at best You know, she's definitely no lefter than that, probably, right?
Yeah, it's a good way to.
She's that like firmly capitalist party, right? Like for sure.
Yeah.
And she was talking about Germany and coronavirus, and speaking. You know, I don't know how this played to them or whatever. Maybe it was just a platitude, or maybe it was something that people actually give a shit about, or maybe something in between. But she spoke of, you know, the solidarity of the people of Germany, and the shared sense that they all feel on some level that while this is going on, this crisis, we're all responsible to each other, for each other in some way, that we need to do our best to band together, metaphorically, don't literally hold hands, please. But, you know, how to show as a society that, like, we are, you know, to paraphrase one of the worst campaigns in history, stronger together. You know what I mean? And it just really struck me and strikes me that in America, you know, even in Germany, the fucking right-wing Christian Democratic Party, or at least not left-wing Christian Democratic Party, even their prime minister can still speak of solidarity. Now, I know there's probably some limits to that solidarity in Germany. We won't get into that, but at least they have the word. They know what it means, and some people, I mean, it really struck me that, like, even in times of extreme crisis, like a pandemic of an incredibly infectious and pretty deadly disease, like in America, we're not capable of this feeling. All we can think about is keeping our businesses open so that our employees get their wages and our stocks stay high, and that's it.
So much for that.
Like, that's our plan. And I don't know if you find any of that interesting or sad.
Like, it shows you the difference in culture and history, really, of both nations, because one is, you know, a combination of smaller states that banded together in the, you know, late 1800s to form their own nation of their own people, that type of thing, versus, you know, a collection of very disagreeable places coming together with a lack of actual singular identity that is America. Like, the American culture is very hard to define at best. Like, it's hard.
I mean, there may be some of this in Australia too. I'll ask you, I guess. Part of it, and this is definitely not all of it, but part of it has to do with our history as with lots of free land, basically. Now, I mean, it wasn't free originally. Obviously, there were millions and millions of people who lived here before then, and some of them and their descendants still live us today, and they have names, and I do my best to honor them. But we know, historically speaking, like, Guns, Germs, Steel pushed those people out. That land is now empty and for white conquest, and now we have a sort of safety valve to, like, funnel people towards when we need to. Our society becomes, like, overburdened, overtaxed. You know, this is what we do. This is our tradition. We move west, and there's this free land out there, and this has delayed the sort of growth, largely speaking, in America, of a sense of social solidarity with one another and community building, where every man is his own yeoman farmer, either literally or metaphorically. And I don't know if it's been the same in Australia, because we think there'd be a lot of free land, but there's, again, you know, a lot of the interior is not actually great for farming or anything.
See, that's Australia's in that unique position of it actually, because of the limited immigration it had, it still maintained that slight. There was a frontier attitude.
Yes, thank you. That is the fucking word I was looking for. Frontier. I went through all that and never said the word frontier. I'm so stupid. You're the best.
But yeah, there was a frontier attitude that was developed to a small degree, but also at the same time, there was population concentration in a few cities. So, like, you can have solidarity within like a small city and still maintain a slight frontier attitude, which is what Australia, I think, did uniquely.
I mean, just like it fosters class consciousness, an orthodox Marxist might say. Yeah.
Yes. Like there's definitely an identifiable class divide that people recognized for a lot of Australia's history.
I mean, we'll have to get into some of the time. You guys do have something called a Labour Party, and it is.
Thankfully.
I mean, broadly speaking, it is kind of like, I think one way to put Bernie Sanders' mission, and this is kind of my mission too, is to sort of laborize the Democratic Party, make it the party of labor, and not another bourgeois coalition opposed to a right-wing bourgeois coalition. And I don't know if the Australian Labour Party really is that, though. You never know.
The biggest donator, the people who give the most money to the Labour Party are still trade unions, thankfully. So,
I mean, it may not be perfect, but you're probably, I mean, it's right in the name, so that is a signal to me, at least, that you're probably better further along than we are.
Yeah. I will say, though, that Bernie Sanders would be in the left of the Labour Party, of the left faction. So,
yes, because Australia, people don't know, Australia, in some ways, like, it is kind of left of us, but in a lot of ways, it's not like fucking Sweden, you know, or Denmark compared to us or anything like that. Yeah. Oh, too bad. That sure would be awesome. You know? Yeah. But they don't speak English really as much.
Yeah, so we don't care.
Me, so that's why you're here.
Yeah, exactly.
The only foreigners I can talk to are the ones that speak English. I'm joking. I'm sure they're a bunch of like Swedes and Denmark. They all know English too.
Yeah, but like they have a weird accent, so it's like you don't know what they're saying half the time.
All right, we got to end this now before we start to fight, because your accent. You're the one who talks weird, son. You talk weird. You don't talk like no American I never heard. So in terms of closing thoughts on the debate and the primary, I think we both have something. Nick, I know people here, you're a little bit of a detached observer, although you also live on planet Earth. So what we do sort of exactly. But people, broadly speaking, on the left in America, feeling a little down because it looks like Bernie is less likely to be the nominee than Joe Biden, and that has a lot of implications for the possible futures. How are you feeling, bro?
Obviously it's not the best feeling in the world, but I will say two things. Is that it's not over till Bernie Sanders' campaign says it over. And when I say over, I'm specifically talking about his presidential campaign. Because at the end of the day, it's never going to be over.
You think he should stay in? You think he should stay in even if Joe Biden passes him and gets 50% plus one delegates? I do. I do. I think he should stay in.
Yeah, fuck it. He's not going to run again.
Fuck it. Just
he's not gonna. Yeah. But yeah. But beyond that, I'm sorry to say this, folks, it's never going to be over. You're never going to be able to sit down and say, well, don't have to pay attention to politics anymore. We've done it all. We've managed to fix all the things. So even if it doesn't work out for Bernie at the end of the day, you have to keep fighting. Because guess what? You don't live at the end of history. You're not an arrogant fuckhead like who thinks the neoliberal order is consolidated after the Cold War. Because it's not. It never will be. So this can change, and it will change. You just got to keep fighting, and that's my finishing thoughts.
In the same vein, and I appreciate that, the mission, win or lose, also doesn't change in that we have to, in America and worldwide, I'd say, empower marginalized, working class people who have been shut out of political power for basically all of human history to seize more and more and more of it in order to build a world more and more hospitable to them. Not because they're better than everyone else, but because there are more of them, and they're the ones who make the world go, and they're the ones with the vision to make the world a better place for everyone. Because I firmly believe that, rich people, billionaires, are actually miserable fucks. But so in that sense, like the mission to build a broad, working class, diverse coalition doesn't change whether or not Bernie wins or loses, because the alternative is either a right-wing, basically, organized entirely around crackpot economics and white nationalism, or everyone who's not that but not a socialist. And if that other, or not a social democrat at least, and if that other last category sounds a little bit like amorphous and not firmly defined and not really like for anything, like that's why it's gonna lose. either in the short term or the long term, it doesn't matter. Like either way, it's not sustainable. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Right?
Exactly.
Anyway, mysterious foreign Australian benefactor Nick, I appreciate you joining me.
Joe Biden 2020, let's go! Woo!